Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking about Jill Biden's big gaffe, an over-the-counter birth control push, and New York prosecutes a man for defending himself. Let's jump in. All right, it feels good to be back. I had so much FOMO last week listening to Brad and Jack on the podcast, but you guys did a great job. Do you feel that kind of FOMO when you're out, Brad? Because I really felt like my friends were hanging out without me.
Yeah, I do. It's always bittersweet. I'm glad that you guys did a good job, but yeah, there's definitely FOMO.
Yeah.
How was Florida, right?
It was great. So I took off for Key West.
Wait, no, tell them about the roaches.
Oh my God. This was, okay, buckle up, guys. This is quite the story. So one thing you need to know about me is that I turn into a little 4-year-old girl when I see a roach. I'll kill almost any other bug, but a roach, absolutely not. And in the deep south, we have these like monster roaches. They're actually called palmetto bugs or water bugs, and they are like, this big. They're massive. They can fly. They're impossible to kill. So my friend Amisha joined me, went down to Key West. I had this like romanticized idea of Key West. I'd only been one day passing through in high school, but I knew Ernest Hemingway lived there, and he would like go to a bar and have a Bloody Mary and write. It was like this little shipping village, and he wrote Old Man the Sea there. And so in my mind, that's what I was going to do last weekend. I was going to snorkel, and I was just going to have this little Ernest Hemingway vacation. Amisha and I checked into a hotel, a Marriott. I usually stay at Marriott, okay? That's a good chain. They usually don't fall beneath a certain standard. This is not like, we weren't like a Days Inn, okay?
This was not a motel.
No, this is an expensive hotel. And I wake up the first morning there to Amisha screaming in the bathroom. And I'm like, what is she screaming about? Amisha's pretty stoic. She's not a very extrovert, like exaggerated friend. And she's like, there's a roach. So I'm up like a whip, right? I'm like out of bed. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a roach. I'm putting on my shoes. And then I see another one in the room crawling by the bed. I couldn't even get my phone to get out of there. It was horrific. And basically we had to call security to come up there and escort us out. And it was hilarious when the guy first got up there. He comes up with a can of Raid. Like, sir, I'm like, this room is infested with, this is not enough. We need more than Raid. And you can tell at first he's kind of looking at Amisha and I sideways, like these dumb girls need help because there's a bug. But as we're making him stand there, guard us while we're packing, 3 more roaches come out. And by the end, this man's screaming too. He's like, oh my gosh, you guys need a refund. Let's get you out of here. It was traumatizing. And so we left. They were like, do you want another room? We were like, absolutely not. We will be leaving. And so we headed out, and we ended up moving to a really beautiful resort right on the water. So our vacation got way better. If you ever go, it was called Ocean Key Resort, and we loved it. We ended up having a really great trip. But I will say Key West is not what I pictured. It is a party town. It's kind of like Mardi Gras down there. And so I didn't get much riding done, but I did still have a great time.
Well, I'm glad. And I'm glad they gave you a refund. That should have been the easiest refund ever. They should have been showering you with gift cards and rewards. I told you, my boyfriend will call the manager. He'll call the customer service line and get you. He always does this. He's very good at it, calling the customer service line. And even for things that aren't their fault, like flights canceled because of weather, he'll walk away with a $150 gift card or something. He has a real talent. But you didn't get photos of the roaches. You always have to document it, because then you can really hold them hostage.
Listen, I know that's what we should have done, but I need you to understand that I almost threw my phone 4 times, no less, while packing to get out of there, because I was screaming.
Man, you literally carry a firearm, and you're like ready to shoot somebody who tries to hold you up or harm you, but you see a roach and you're like, ah!
Well, I didn't have my gun with me because I flew there, so I had no defense. I was totally vulnerable to these roaches, but yeah, I don't know what it is. Roaches just really undo me. Last year when I first moved to Georgia, I had not hired my like regular exterminator service yet. I think you remember this. I evacuated my house for like half a week because I saw a roach, and I was like, nope, out of here. I'll come back once the exterminator's through. Like, we're not doing this. So yeah, they're probably my biggest fear. But I conquered another big fear of mine while in Key West. I went snorkeling, which is a pretty big deal for me. I'm very scared of sharks. I've only been snorkeling one other time down in the Virgin Islands, but I decided I really wanted to do it. And while I was snorkeling, some other snorkelers reported a shark, and I stayed in the water. I didn't even get out. I know. I was like, look at me being a boss. So it was a weekend trip where I conquered all my fears of nature, basically.
Well, compared to all that drama, my weekend was pretty tame in comparison. We had a friend visit and did a few fun things, but yeah, nothing too exciting to report. No infestations here.
Well, even if you didn't have a super exciting weekend, I guess that means you got to watch Twitter a good bit more than me. And I came back yesterday as I was traveling back from Key West to a Twitter firestorm because the First Lady, Jill Biden, she apparently went to give a speech over the weekend to a quote-unquote Latinx event, and she really stepped in it.
Yeah, so that was the first strike, right? She went to some event, and it was like a Latinx event, which for folks that don't know is like supposedly a gender-neutral form of Latino or Latina, but polls show 99% of Hispanic people and Latino people do not use it, and many actually find it offensive. It's like a woke colonization of their language pushed by academics and white Twitter activists mostly. So she already started off on the wrong foot, but then she kind of put her...
Sorry, I just have to say, this is what this makes me think of, because the Latin community has been very vocal in hating Latinx, and Democrats will not hang it up. And it really reminds me of Mean Girls, when they're like, stop trying to make fetch happen, Karen. It's not going to happen. That is Democrats with Latinx. Like, they won't give it up. They love it for some reason. But yeah, that was the first kind of problematic thing that she did.
Well, that was just from the get-go, but then she went on to put her foot in her mouth big time. Take a listen to this little clip we've got here.
But we can't get those things on our own. Raul helped build this organization with the understanding that the diversity of this community, as distinct as the Bodegas of the Bronx, as beautiful as the blossoms of Miami, and as unique as the breakfast tacos here in San Antonio, is your strength.
So whoever wrote this, whatever speechwriter, should probably be fired or at least sent to some additional training, because that was a completely unnecessary train wreck.
That feels like an episode of Veep. I don't know if you ever watched Veep, but it reminds me of the vice president, the kind of gaffes that she makes on that show. This is ridiculous. I'm like, what intern wrote this speech? And you can tell that whoever it is somebody who is just so in their own bubble that they are completely unaware of any kind of pushback that would come from this. And I mean, listen, I don't want to overreact to this. I don't think she meant harm by it. I certainly don't think she was trying to be offensive. But I think it comes from a place of two things, which is ignorance and arrogance, right? Ignorance of like what the actual feedback is from the community you're trying to reach and how they feel about language.
Being called tacos.
Yeah. And two, it's like this arrogance, this over familiarity of like, and I see this with Democrats a lot, and I've actually spoken about this where they feel like it's like this white savior kind of complex they have, where they come in and they're like, we're the people helping the Black community, or we're the people helping the Hispanic community. And they feel like they can get overly familiar and start to say things and joke around in a way that's like really not cool. It's like maybe like within the community you can make these kinds of jokes. Even then it'd be kind of cringe and weird, but like certainly not you as a white woman coming in and saying this. And it's so embarrassing to me, but I think oftentimes this is how you see, there's two ways this happens, but it's how you see the left become actually, I would argue, more racist than the right at times in things that they say. The other way that they do that is in like talking down to the communities they're supposed to be serving and basically having like the low expectations of racism that you see implied through a lot of their policies. But this right here was just, I mean, it was so ridiculous. She really stepped in it. But I have to say, coming back to the reactions on Twitter, it sparked joy for me because people were high-key funny in how they reacted to this online.
Yeah, they really were. So some of the reactions were serious, and we can get to one of those in a moment. But Marco Rubio, for example, tweeted, #new profile picture, then just a picture of a taco.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people in the Latin community like making their profile pictures tacos, and I was like, you guys are hilarious.
Our friend Hinema, who works over at Senator Rand Paul's office, she tweeted out, "The left continues to put us in buckets without realizing we carry different beliefs and come from different countries. They continue to label us as Latinx, and now the First Lady is calling us tacos. Luckily, the GOP continues to receive the taco emoji support. #si se puede." I thought that was pretty funny.
I was cracking up with her little taco emojis, but I mean, it is so ridiculous. Like, I don't know. I sent it to everybody I could think of when I saw it on Twitter. I'm like, the first lady literally just called a room of Latin Americans tacos. Like, what? Yeah.
She did, and of course the response, I want to be clear, like, neither of us think that Jill Biden is some racist. We don't think she hates Hispanic people or anything, or she's some closet Nazi. No, she's just obviously very cringe, and whoever wrote this speech was just so pandering and didn't understand how this would be condescending. And so we're not overreacting to it the way some people will with these things. But A, it's very funny, and B, it reveals something deeper, I think, about the progressive left and their approach to identity politics in these communities and how surface level it really is. The National Association of Hispanic Journalists responded in a statement and said that they encouraged the First Lady and her communications team to take time to better understand the complexities of our people and communities. A new sentence. We are not tacos. Oh my gosh.
It is so offensive because I think it goes back to a collectivist mindset, right? Of reducing whole groups of individuals who are vastly different within that ethnicity to something that is so stereotypical as a type of food that they eat, right? It would be like calling all white girls from Alabama barbecue or something. Like, I don't know. It's just like, it's so ridiculous and offensive and absurd. But I think it does come from this place of ignorance and of seeing people in groups and really not taking the time, which is a huge beef I have with pretty much everybody in politics, not taking time to get to know the communities you claim to be trying to serve, right? Like, you don't actually have the understanding of what the day-to-day is like for people in these communities, what they think, what would be offensive to them, what would help them, and yet you want to come in and micromanage their lives. And that's actually the most offensive part about it.
So the First Lady has apologized. A spokesperson for her said, "The First Lady apologizes that her words conveyed anything but pure admiration and love for the Latino community." Which, two things there. One, she apologized pretty quickly, but also that's kind of one of those apologies that's like, I'm sorry you felt that way. And also notice the Latino instead of the Latinx.
Maybe it's finally getting through the echo chambers up there in DC because it really needs to die a fiery death. Stop with the Latinx. Listen to the people and what they say they want to be called. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, like, you and I have talked about this a good bit within the transgender community when we talk about pronouns and how, like, I would always respect somebody's pronouns if they ask to be referred to in a certain way, refer to them by the name. I work really hard to get people's names right. Like, I know my friend Amisha was talking about earlier, like, she's all her life had to deal with people who won't take the basic 5 seconds to learn how to pronounce her name, and it's offensive. And it's kind of like that. Like, when you continue to push Latinx on people who have said that's not what we're called, that's not our name, it is very offensive and it needs to stop.
It's from the same woke crowd that says you must use people's preferred pronouns. And it's like they're telling you their preferred pronouns and you're saying those aren't good enough. I mean, it's not a pronoun, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So this whole incident reminded me of something from the Trump presidency. So I went back and dug this up. Trump, when he was in office, he had this very cringeworthy tweet. Let me read some reporting from the Daily Caller. Cinco de Mayo, an annual celebration held May 5th, brings one particular memory to mind when thinking about President Donald Trump, his tweet about taco bowls and the Trump Tower Grill. In 2016, apparently to recognize Cinco de Mayo, the then Republican presidential candidate tweeted a photograph of himself enjoying a taco bowl. The president even re-upped his tweet in 2020. This was what the tweet said: "Happy Cinco de Mayo. The best taco bowls are made in Trump Tower Grill. I love Hispanics!" ! And so that was extremely cringe. I think it was probably well-intentioned. But the media panned him for this. One outlet called it offensive, another one said it was disreputable pandering. A bunch of them went with the headlines of, like, Latinos condemn Trump's Cinco de Mayo tweet. Even Hillary Clinton tweeted about it, bashing Trump. And then you have to contrast this all to just, I think the media is covering this gaffe by the First Lady, Jill Biden. But they're doing it kind of with kitty gloves on in comparison. And I just think that if Trump had described Hispanic people as tacos, that would have been a much bigger deal. And it would have also been interpreted much less charitably, more with the worst faith interpretation. And I don't really think that's right.
They would have lost their freaking minds if he had said this, or if anybody on the right had said this. It would be the biggest media storm, and I definitely don't think you'd hear pundits on the left taking it like we are. We're like, no, it's not racist. It's cringe and it's ridiculous, and it does show that you don't know the community you're trying to talk to. But like, it would have been a totally different reaction, which I think is also proof that many on the right, especially people I think who are within these communities who find themselves sort of in the conservative Republican buckets, they have a lot better sense of humor about some things. Like, they don't take things so seriously, and I have to say I appreciate that. Like, Marco Rubio's tweet is hilarious. I've seen many other people kind of in that camp, and it's good to call these things out and point out why that they are not okay and that they're offensive, but it's also, you know, do it with proportionality to what's actually happening.
Yeah, don't be a snowflake. Like, Marco Rubio could have, instead of tweeting out a joke about it, he could have been all pearl clutch. This is deeply offensive. This is racism, blah, 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 which is what the Democrats would do to a Republican. But people on the right are supposed to be better than that. They're supposed to not be snowflakes, and they are sometimes. But in this case, a lot of people are approaching it with good humor, which I really do appreciate.
Yeah, and I have to say, the most offensive thing about Trump's prior tweet was that he claimed the best taco bowls come from New York City in a building. Let me tell you, I lived in New York City for 6 months. Some of the worst Mexican food you'll ever find, okay? So that's actually where he really misstepped in his tweet.
Business Insider did an article at the time of that tweet reviewing the taco bowl at Trump Tower, and I think they said something like they were passable but unremarkable or something. It was really funny. They did a whole story like, we tried the super controversial Trump taco bowl. Here's how it tasted.
The effort that went into that piece is hilarious. But yeah, I would stand by that. I would say that was one thing I hated about living in New York City is you can get a lot of good food, but the Mexican food, I mean, I'm spoiled. I'm from down south, but like way better down here than up there. Either way, I'm glad she apologized. Maybe this will be the death of the stupid Latinx term and we can all move forward. But yeah, don't compare people to foods. It's never going to go over well for you, Jill Biden. Okay, but on to our next topic and some pretty positive news. Brad's got a new piece up at FEE on this, and I'm really excited about it. I actually wrote a piece at Base Politics about it not too long ago, arguing that birth control should be available over the counter. That would be oral contraception, which currently requires a prescription. And if you don't have health insurance, can be quite pricey for many people. Now, we had seen some inklings, I'd say, some pushes for the FDA basically to get rid of this requirement. We saw some medical associations speak out in favor of that, especially around the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I argued in my piece that, you know, no matter what happens with Roe v. Wade, there will still be abortions as long as there are unwanted pregnancies. And so if you actually care about eliminating abortions, you have to go to the root cause of the problem, which is unwanted pregnancies. And there's a lot we could be doing to reduce that. But Brad, you covered a new development that's making this look like it might even be more imminent.
Yeah, so it might actually be happening. It's weird to say the FDA might actually be doing something good for once, but they just received a request from a French contraceptive company that's seeking authorization to sell their birth controls over the counter without a prescription, which, like you mentioned, that's currently required nationwide here. And it makes it not only more expensive, but also not everyone has access to a doctor, can get an appointment, can travel there, can has health insurance. It just adds layers and steps and barriers that for most people, you know, who are comfortably middle class are no big deal. But for people down lower in the rung of society, they can be. And also, yeah, so anyway, the push is to sell this medication over the counter. There's been calls for a long time, and the FDA finally might relent. And I just want to make a couple caveats about this topic. One, I view it as something that pro-lifers and pro-choicers should be able to agree on. It's like, regardless of what you think abortion law should be, we all want fewer, except for like crazy far-left activists who say shout your abortion, but they're a tiny fringe. Most people agree abortion is bad and also not good for the woman. It would be better to avoid the situation in the first place. Almost everyone agrees. And so one way to do that is to increase access to things like hormonal birth control, which when used properly is extremely effective. It is a serious medication and can have serious side effects. I don't know this personally, but I've heard it from many, many, many women in my life, and also obviously I've read about it. But still, the American Medical Association endorses making it available over the counter. They've called on the FDA to approve the change, and they call it an easy call from a public health perspective. Other medical groups have endorsed it as well because they say that studies show some women shouldn't take birth control, right? Because of different contraindications or like conditions or health elements about them that make there could be problems if they take it. But studies have actually shown that women are able to self-screen for that effectively. And also, anytime you're at a pharmacy and purchasing a medication, you can, for free, consult with the pharmacist. So you could even, if you wanted to just make it a lot more accessible, but still have something, you could require them to talk to the pharmacist to purchase it, but not need a prescription. So they can still do it in one trip. They don't need health insurance. They don't have to pay more money for a doctor's visit. So I just think it's a common sense step. I don't think that birth control is just, willy-nilly. It's like Tylenol or anything. It is a serious medication, but I think women, adult women, right, this would be 18 and up, are fully capable of weighing the risks and benefits for themselves.
Well, I want to say a few things about it because I often hear a lot of pushback on this, typically from men who have never had to go through the process of getting birth control. And I really do think that this is a big issue because even right now, I'm somebody who has great health insurance. I have means to get birth control, and it's something I was on most of my life. I actually had to go on it when I was quite young, in like 9th grade, because I had another medical condition. I had a pituitary gland issue, which can kill you in the brain. And they often use hormonal birth control to even out hormonal imbalances and things like that. And so I was put on birth control for health reasons, which was the only reason my parents would have ever signed off on it. And to get it, basically at that time, it was still going to be, we had health insurance. It was still going to be like $70, $75 a month, like not a cheap prescription at all. Now, because it was for health reasons, my doctor could override that. But basically that meant I still had to be able to go to a gynecologist, which even if you have health insurance requires a specialist fee and can take months to get into, especially in more rural areas. Gynecologists take women a long time to get appointments to. We have a shortage. We need more of them. So that's the first problem. Then once I got the prescription, I had to be able to get it to the pharmacy. I had to then be able to have the doctor call in, override the process, and basically send a letter to my insurance to get the price knocked down. Now, all of that requires me having parents at age 14, 15 who are highly competent, who can help me navigate that system, and who can still afford to pay all of those costs, right? So I've had that was my first experience. I was on birth control most of my life because of that. And so I've had kind of an easy go of it, but I've seen a lot of people not have that access. And I have to say, I'm even okay with like it being under 18, being able to buy it, because the things that make it a medical condition, like it could easily be put on the box, people who should not take it, right? It's people who have a certain number of conditions. And basically when you go into a doctor, they've never worked with me on those conditions. There's this perception that you go in and the doctor's just thoroughly checking and warning you about all these problems with birth control. That never happened. Even though I was put on it very young, as I've aged, I've discovered a lot of issues with birth control. It has some side effects that I don't particularly love. It can actually change your mood and personality. Some studies even show it can change who you're attracted to, which is terrifying. It has a lot of other like weight gain and emotional issues that are attached to it. So there are serious side effects, but no doctor has ever talked to me about that. And I've been polling other women. I'm like, has your doctor ever talked to you about these side effects from birth control? And it's like, no, they check to see if you have high blood pressure, because if you have high blood pressure or prone to clotting, then you shouldn't go on it. And that's pretty much the extent of it, which could easily be done, as you said, by talking to a pharmacist in the store. Even nowadays, when I've wanted to go back on it, I have had to either wait for a very long time to get in to see a gynecologist before I could get the prescription, or I've had to go online and use like an online prescription service, which can still take about a month to get enrolled in. So all that to say, these lags in coverage are difficult even for people like me. Imagine how much more difficult it is for the population that tends to get abortions, which is people who are younger, people who are of lower means, people who don't have health insurance, people who often don't have transportation. These things should be available in places like CVS, where they can walk in, quickly consult with a pharmacist, and keep it moving. And I see absolutely no argument to the contrary. And furthermore, this is how it operates in many Western countries. I covered this in my base politics piece. This isn't, something where we just be an outlier here. It's actually something where a lot of countries already do this and have not had any serious issues with it. So I think this should be something people should be able to come together on for sure. All right, guys. So I came back from my vacation in Key West to another disturbing story that actually Brad had covered for us at Base Politics. You can go read his piece. I think it's a really great read. But essentially, recently there was a man at a New York City bodega, and he was charged with killing a man who attacked him behind the counter, according to NBC news stations. His name's Jose Alba, and basically what's happening is that he was working at a bodega. For those of you who aren't familiar with New York City, a bodega is like a side kind of like grocery store market. It doesn't have gas stations, obviously, because nobody drives in New York, but you would walk in and get, you know, basic groceries, a deli counter sandwich. These are kind of the like lifeblood of New York City. Everybody's in a bodega a good bit, and he was working there. And basically this couple came in and there was an altercation between them. I believe that he had some issues processing the payment, and basically the girl's boyfriend started becoming very aggressive, got behind the counter and started assaulting him, violently assaulting him. And then Alba basically retrieved a knife that he kept there. I mean, one can only assume for self-protection because New York City doesn't allow most people to have guns. And he stabbed the attacker multiple times, ultimately killing him in self-defense to get him off of him. This man was like pummeling him. And so to me, this is a very clear-cut case of self-defense. Very, very clear-cut. And yet, the, I would say, psychopathic DA of New York City, who has had a lot of issues already, this is by no means the first issue we've seen out of this guy. I think there might even be, like, pushes to recall him in the city. But he has decided to pursue murder charges against Jose Alba for this. So he was taken to Rikers prison, which is one of the worst prisons in the country, like really rough conditions. He was held there for over a week. I can't even imagine. And now he's been released on bail, but the charges are still pending. And I just think this is an absolute outrage.
Yeah, it really is. And just so folks know, like, there is a video. I watched it multiple times. You can watch this altercation for yourself. Alba is an older man behind the counter, and this much younger, intimidating guy gets angry, comes around enters behind, the clerk's area into the cash register, corners him, traps him in the corner, extremely viciously shoves him into the wall, then is looming over him. And when the stabbing actually occurs, you can see Alba tries to get up and go past the man who's assaulting him. And then the man grabs him and stops him, and that's when Alba, who has this knife, I don't know if he grabs it from the counter or if it's, tucked into his waist, I don't know. That's when he stabs him. Only when his attempt to flee is interjected and stopped. So to me, this is really a clear-cut case of self-defense. This shouldn't even be a partisan thing. The mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, he's a progressive Democrat, yet he said that his heart goes out to this hardworking, honest New Yorker that was doing his job in his place of business, where a person came in and went behind the counter and attacked him. So he's basically sympathizing with this guy. He did say he's not going to interfere with the district attorney, which I agree, that's like, you're not allowed to do that. But this district attorney, we need to be looking at him and being like, WTF? Because first off, I firmly believe that Alba it should take this to trial and will win at trial. But it's like, why are you persecuting this man who, what he did was really sad, but he belongs in therapy, grappling with the attempt on his life and the drastic actions he was forced to take. Killing somebody, I would imagine, has a profound impact on you. But he belongs in therapy, not a jail cell. He didn't do anything truly wrong. And so it's also bizarre because New York City has all sorts of crime and problems that they could be focusing on, but instead they're doing this. And more evidence and more videos of earlier on in the altercation keep coming out. Originally there was no audio to the video, but now they found the audio. And all of it only is helping his case further. So to me it shows how much disrespect they have for our basic rights to self-defense. You mentioned they've been one of the most restrictive places in the country in terms of guns. I think they truly don't believe citizens have the right to defend themselves, even from somebody who's threatening their life. And to me, that is just mind-boggling and insane and wrong.
Yeah, well, the DA's name is Alvin Bragg. I actually tweeted his contact information. If anybody wants to go contact his office, which is what we should do. We need a lot more people to hold a lot more DAs accountable in this country because these guys are rogue and they often make really ludicrous decisions in who they charge and who they don't charge. And I'm fed up with it. I think DAs are one of the biggest problems in this country, as my audience well knows. But in this particular case, I think it's quite disgusting because New York has a very bad crime problem at the moment, right? And it's often in these kinds of incidents where you see people being jumped in the streets, punched in the subway, shoved onto subway tracks. They are random acts of violence. You have a lot of people who have mental health conditions and homeless issues and economic conditions that are going unchecked in that city. Crime has many contributing factors, but I would say New York and as a whole, leftist urban centers just trigger all of them, right? Because they're doing so many things wrong with their policies, they exacerbate these conditions. Before COVID, New York basically had a good handle on crime, but since COVID, it's really spiraled up there. It's to the point where when I'm up there, I don't go in the subway anymore. I don't walk around. I take Uber because it's not safe like it used to be in the city. And instead of actually clamping down on that kind of violence, they're going to go after the store owners, the foundations of that city, the people who have stuck around through the pandemic, dealt with their crappy policies, continue to try to offer basic value and services to the citizens who have remained there. It is so idiotic. I can't even fathom the mentality going into these decisions being made in that city, but it's really turning into just a gutter fire, and they need to get a hold of it because this is unacceptable. This man should absolutely be in therapy. He should be able to get the services that he needs to recuperate from this horrific incident that happened to him. And as a whole, the city needs to send a signal that if you commit random acts of violence, you show up at a bodega and you start beating somebody up in their place of business, there will be repercussions. And if somebody acts in self-defense against you, they are perfectly within their rights to do so, and the city will back them. That's how it should actually go.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted out when I first discovered this case, very simply, free Jose Alba. The principle at stake here is around and find out. That's what he did, and that's what happened. I'm sorry, it's sad, it's tragic, but play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You cannot go and trap someone and threaten them and shove them and do this and then expect... Look, people are like, well, that crime doesn't deserve the death penalty, or he wouldn't get the death penalty from a jury. And I'm like, sure, he wouldn't. And no one's saying that, like, we should murder anybody who roughs up a store clerk. But the principle is more that you do have the right to defend yourself when your life is in danger. So you have to expect that as a possible consequence of your actions when you go and commit violence against somebody else. It was also like... people just have no chill anymore. I mean, we've seen this with airline freakouts. The issue this started over was him declining her EBT card or some sort of transaction issue. Just go somewhere else. If it's not going to work, if you can't fix it, or just, yell at him if you really need to and then leave. Or leave him a bad Yelp review. I don't know, but there's just a million things you could do. What she actually did... And you know what? She's being overlooked as a problem in this. Obviously, she didn't assault anyone, but she went and got her boyfriend. He wasn't originally in there with her, and said, he's going to come rough you up, or he's going to come deal with you, or I don't know exactly what she said. That's not a quote. But so she escalated the situation and went and got her man to come confront this store owner. And it's like, why, Karen? Why not just go about your business? Go to another store.
She Jada Pinkett Smithed him. I didn't even know that part. But no, you're right. And, like, I can't stand when people say, like, well, the crime for assault shouldn't be death. It's like, okay, at what point when you're being assaulted do you know that they're not going to kill you? Because the fact is, this man could have killed him, right? It's not just that he, like, slapped him around. Like, he was ongoingly assaulting him. This man was fighting back. And when somebody is assaulting you with violence, you are allowed to defend yourself to the full extent that you need to. You don't wait until you're bleeding out from somebody violently assaulting you to actually fight back. You have to fight back when it starts. So when people say that kind of thing, I'm like, tell me you know nothing about violence. Tell me how sheltered and privileged you are to not know anything about how these kind of interactions can go and how they can, how the temperament of them can change quite quickly because things escalate.
That's the interesting aspect here is the elite educated liberal class in New York City, the people like the district attorney, are the ones who are thinking of this as a crime to be prosecuted. But somebody like Eric Adams, who is on the left on many things, but he comes from a working class background. He is a man of the people. He is himself African American. Some people tried to make this a race thing because the man who was killed was black. But first off, I'm pretty sure Jose Alba is Hispanic, and also it didn't have anything to do with race or racism. But Eric Adams sees through this. He knows these communities. He actually is in touch with them, what it's like, what these people go through. And I just think it's a really detached view that thinks somebody like this should be prosecuted. And I also, this is also why we have I don't know the specifics of the law. I'm not a criminal attorney. I had a friend who's a criminal attorney message me and say that this case isn't as clear-cut as I think it is as a matter of law. And I said, I think actually, though, as more facts has come out, he may have evolved his position and now thinks it's more clear-cut self-defense. But regardless, even if the law is murky, this is why we have jury nullification. Juries, people don't know this. If you're on a jury, the lawyers aren't allowed to tell you about it and say that you should do it, but you have the right to decide to nullify the charge and say whether it's illegal or not, this is immoral to prosecute somebody for this, and we reject it. And so even if, I don't think he violated the law, but I'm not an expert on criminal law. Even if he did, they should nullify it because he did nothing wrong as a matter of morality. And he had no other option. He tried to flee and couldn't. That's the thing. Some states differentiate between standing your ground and trying to flee, and they only give you the right to lethal self-defense if you can't flee. And I actually think that's very problematic as standard, and I don't know what New York's is. I imagine they don't have a stand your ground law. But regardless, he would meet even that definition because he tried to run past him and the guy grabbed him and didn't let him go. And only then did he stab him. He also stabbed him 3 times, enough to disable him. It's not like he went above and beyond to kill him, right? He really just did what he had to do to disable the man who was threatening his life. And then he unfortunately died. Yeah, I think the whole thing's an outrage.
And the problem, too, is, like, yes, you have jury nullification. Yes, like, a jury, I think, would rule in his favor. But the fact is he should not be charged because the minute he's charged, the state starts spending a vast amount of resources to prosecute this crime. And it is an utter disservice to the taxpayer to waste taxpayer dollars and resources going after this kind of crime when other kinds of crime that are actually violent, that are actually people on the offensive versus defensive are running rampant, right? Go use the resources to actually prevent more crime. Jose Alba is not going to be out in the streets tomorrow hurting somebody else. It sounds like the guy he killed was going to be. So you need to be going after more of these kinds of people and actually using our resources.
Don't you think the fact that they're charging him could lead him to plead guilty just because they do it in a manner that's so coercive? There's like, oh, if you take it to trial, you could get 40 years. Better just sign on the line and get 5 or 10. It's a very coercive system, right?
I mean, that's almost always what they do. No exaggeration there. It's like 99% of cases at the state level are pled out. 95% of federal are pled out. They always bully people into not going to trial. And the point is, too, that Jose Alba still has to hire a defense for himself right now. I mean, yeah, he could have a public defender, but he's not going to have a very fair shake if he does that because those guys are way overwhelmed and have a ton of cases. So even if you're innocent, even if you did, nothing wrong, now he's looking at having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars just to defend himself in court. And if he wins and prevails, he doesn't get that money back. He's not going to get damages from the prosecutor and the city for wrongfully prosecuting him. So this is an utter injustice. He needs to be freed immediately. The charges need to be dropped. I think it's really gross, and I think Alvin Bragg needs to have the spotlight really bright on his face right now. All right, guys. Well, that brings us to our hot takes. My hot take is that hotels that have roaches should be condemned. One
Close
shot.
them down.
I mean, burn them to the ground. Like, I want to see ashes. I'm not over it. I'm sorry. I'm still high-key mad. I'm going to be calling Marriott about this because I've been a loyal member for a long time, but now I'm thinking about moving my membership. This is outrageous. This just isn't acceptable. No more roaches.
So my hot take is that when prosecutors take you to trial or want to pursue you or whatever, you should, if you are acquitted, they should have to pay your attorney's fees. Because, like you mentioned, people will say, oh, well, we already provide them a public defender option. And first off, not all states actually do. In some states, if you're above a certain income, they make you pay the public defender. It's not free. And I actually believe it should be. That's one of the rare things I think the government should spend money on, is providing a criminal defense to everybody. But I actually think that they should have to pay off your attorney's fees the same way that often happens in like other forms of civil lawsuits, because otherwise the public defenders do the best they can, but they're so overworked. They have insane caseloads that you'll often get a substandard defense if you have a public defender, unfortunately. And that's no shade to the people in those jobs. It's just that when when they have 100 cases and a proper caseload is 20, they can't do the due diligence and mount the defense that people deserve. And so when you have to take on that expense just to defend your liberty, I think if they ultimately aren't able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed a crime, they should have to pay for that, refund that. And people are like, oh, you mean the taxpayers? Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, also, I'm really good with getting rid of the absolute immunity prosecutors enjoy. I think they should be able to be held civilly liable when they lie, when they commit misconduct, when they do any number of other things that attribute to wrongful convictions or to wrongful charges. So I think we need to stack the deck against the government versus the individual in every possible way we can, because right now it goes the entire opposite direction.
Oh, you want to know another hot take I had? My boyfriend and I were talking about this the other day. There's a lot in conservative circles, the Federalist, for example, the publication name, or like there's a lot of talk about like the Federalists and the Founding Fathers and everything and how great they were. And I actually think the Anti-Federalists were more based. So for folks that don't know, in the debate about the drafting of the Constitution, the Federalists were the ones who wanted to give more power to a central government because the Articles of Confederation that we had before the Constitution had such a weak federal government that it couldn't do anything. But then the debate was between the Federalists, like James Madison, who were writing in favor of more centralized powers in the federal government, and the Anti-Federalists, who were pushing back against that. And they're actually the reason that we have the Bill of Rights. They demanded the Bill of Rights as a concession. They constrained the federal government to its enumerated powers and said all these things it can't do. And so somebody, my boyfriend said to me that like the Federalist is a very cool name for a publication, whatever you think of its contents. And I agree. I actually think it is a cool name, but I actually think Anti-Federalist would be better, though it's not as like catchy as a name, but...
Yeah, I actually had a glass of wine that was called the Federalist last night, and I ordered it just because it was called that. But I will say, a good way to remember this for people who might get it confused is Alexander Hamilton was of the Federalist camp, and Thomas Jefferson was of the Anti-Federalist camp, and TJ had a lot more right than Hamilton did as far as his views on government and centralization of power and banking and any number of other things.
Yeah, the worst part of Hamilton for me was when he pushes to create America's first central bank. I'm like... know. You ruined this character for me.
It's like, no, baby, not hot. Don't
not
like
hot.
it. Not hot at all. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, remember, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It only takes a couple seconds, and we'll read it on air. You can also join our locals community where we're hanging out with some of our biggest supporters daily. That's only $5 a month. It means a whole lot to us to have your support. So check out those two things if you like the show. And other than that, we'll see you next week. Stay based.